Okay, so hello everyone who is here at the Ask the Team event. Thank you for dropping by. We're just going to quickly do a run through here of some housekeeping. So a few quick things, just general agenda, what to expect. We'll start out here and do a quick intro of some of the team members, including myself, who are here. Go over a couple of just quick ground rules, FYIs, things like that, and then we will shift gears into the open Q&A. Just in terms of sort of how to use the client, granted it's probably a little bit new for a lot of us, ourselves included. In the view you've got, there should be a chat box where you can type in questions and then submit them. And then what happens is on our end, we'll end up seeing questions coming in. We'll go out and just sort of scroll through those. Again, there's probably going to be a bunch of them, so just give us time to sort of work through them. And then one of us here who's in attendance will cycle through, go live on audio, and hopefully answer the questions to the best of our abilities. Beyond that, again, right, welcome to Microsoft Build. Everything is recorded. Just sort of be cognizant of chat and also sort of adhere to the Microsoft Code of Conduct, which I'll just post up here for folks, just sort of a de rigueur for all of us to be be good to each other. And then I'll go ahead and just post that in there as well. So with that said, let's go ahead and move on through to doing quick intros of folks. So I'll start out with myself first. Hello, everyone. I'm Stefan Shakow, one of the many program managers who works on Azure App Service, and will be one of the folks here today fielding your questions. And so I'm just going to have folks on our team going from the view I've got from sort of left to right. So Andrew, can you intro yourself?
Hi, I'm Andrew Wells. I'm also a program manager on App Service. I've been with the team for about 6 years. I principally own our hybrid efforts, so anything relating to on-prem, Windows containers, that sort of thing in the realms of App Service.
Cool, thanks. All right, gonna hop over to Yutong.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yutong, and I'm also another PM on the team. I pretty much own the certificate and domains area, and as well as the Azure Monitor integration with App Service.
Cool, thanks, Yutong. And then hopping on over to you, Gaurav.
Hi, everyone. I am Gaurav Seth. I'm a PM on the App Services team, and I pretty much own the migration efforts and initiatives on the team.
All right. Cool. Thanks, everyone. And we never know, there may be some folks popping in during the interim as well. So we'll see how that pans out. So at this point, I can see we've already got a bunch of questions queuing up. And like I said, I'm just going to sort of go through them. So don't worry, just give us a little bit of time to get through them. Probably here the plan is I'll just sort of start at the top for the ones that came in. Also realize all of us, myself included, we're on Azure App Service. So there may be questions, understandably, that come up that are a little bit far afield, which we may not be able to address. Certainly let you know if that's the case. So the first one, I see there's a question, any plans to bring the snapshot debugger to Visual Studio Community and Professional? And I apologize, we are probably not the right team to ask about that, because although we love customers who deploy onto us from Visual Studio, I completely admit we are not the group that actually directly works with the Visual Studio development and the debugger that is in there. But thank you for asking the question. Let's see, working down through the list, I'll pop this one out here and read it. So do you think we'll see Dapper able to also run on top of Azure App Service? So, sometime in the future, I would probably say yes. We are definitely aware of the efforts that have been going on with other, brother and sister teams here around Dapper. Obviously, right, we We do have the Linux offering that would probably affinitize pretty well to a number of those scenarios. I can't tell you that right here and now that there is like a formal Dapper offering on App Service, but like I said, it's definitely something we're very aware of, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised that somewhere in the future you hear more about it, both across a number of different Azure services, including Azure App Service itself. All right, let's see, next one. What is the maximum number of concurrent instances of Azure functions supported in the premium app service tier? So again, I'll caveat the answer here, which is we are app service. So although functions definitely does run on us, we are not the specific team that deals with it. But offhand, you should be able to run up to 100 instances. That is actual like VM instances running your functions when you're running in the premium tier of Azure Functions. Beyond that, though, certainly from conversations I've seen with a lot of folks on the Azure Functions team, the answer of precisely how many concurrent instances of your function are going to run is a fuzzy answer, because, for example, you're not going to get scaled out onto 100 Elastic Premium instances if, for example, you're listening on a message queue and there's not a single message on the message queue, right? So there has to be enough traffic driven onto the function to sort of trigger our scaler to say, okay, now I should actually expand the number of instances you have. Okay, let's see. Is there a plan for TLS 1.3 in App Service? Sort of similar to the earlier question on Dapper, I have no doubts it will come to App Service. I know certainly with the passage of time, right, TLS 1.3 has progressed a lot farther along than where it was a year ago. So I'm going to tentatively say yes, but I can also tell you, as we are sitting here today, there's not like, it's not going to show up in 3 months. But it definitely is something on the radar, and I certainly expect at some point we will eventually support TLS 1.3 as a new option on the service. Let's see. Is Jeff here? No, Jeff is not here. Rats. This would have been a perfect question for him. So I see a question, does or will App Service support .NET 5? Certainly it will. There is actually, I think, I'm going to go take a look at it here offline and off the window in the browser. I think one of the folks on our team wrote up a quick article. Yep, sure enough, and I'll pop it here into the chat. I think that will work. So one of the folks on our team did try out just sort of putting together the steps to try out the current .NET 5 preview on App Service. So we do know it works. Probably not surprisingly, as you would expect, as things get a lot closer for .NET 5 in terms of you know, a GA, or at least like a later preview, definitely will come onto the service. Also, again, because again, I haven't gotten through all of the questions. There's an enormous number of them. But for many of you out there who've dealt with .NET Core 3.1, I admit, right, it took longer than we had wanted, in large part, right, because of a lot of the issues around the virus and what that meant in terms of production deployments. But our hope is certainly, right, that we have a much faster timeline for getting 5.0 support on the service when it does get closer to GA. Let's see, Andrew, do you see the next question there? Do you want to field that? It's about scale out.
Sorry, let me just find it here.
It's
yeah,
the one.
I got it.
Okay,
yeah.
I'll go publish it so that everyone can see
I published it. It's okay.
Okay, excellent.
So how do we manage scale out? Are the instances of App Service properly load balanced? And if so, how does App Service verify if each instance is healthy? So our platform has a number of health checks built in to make sure that all of our infrastructure is healthy. And if we identify anything in our health checks to actually mark an instance unhealthy, we take it out of rotation and your application workloads actually move to another instance underneath the hood seamlessly. So you should see very limited impact of that inside your application. You can scale out your applications through a variety of means. You can do it based on a time basis. You can do it via manual. You can do it based on CPU memory load. You can use a number of different metrics if you expand out and use things like the metrics collected in, say, App Insights and that sort of thing to actually handle the scale. The scale out limitations are essentially the number of instances inside your app service plan. So each of our tiers have a limit of instances on your app service plan. On standard, I think it's 10. On premium, it's definitely 20, 25 of the instances is the max that you can go out to. But then we'd encourage you to deploy into multiple regions and then front your applications with Traffic Manager so that you actually distribute your load and give your customers the best possible experience.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Andrew. So let's see, I am going to switch over to the next question and send it out there. Is there any expectation that private endpoints will make it into standard SKUs? Yeah, great question. Granted, right now, we are planning to introduce the private endpoints, sometimes called private link support, into the premium tier. That doesn't mean it's that way for all time, but that is certainly the constraint initially. Definitely have heard this kind of question and feedback before. So again, as I like to say never, but at least for now, as we work through GAing it initially for both Linux and Windows on App Service, that will be the constraint, at least for the near term. All right, next question. Is there an option to have a public landing page while Easy Auth is turned on? You know, that is a great question. I do not have our Easy Auth expert here. Offhand, I don't know of one. I'm sort of looking around other folks I got here on the team. I don't believe there's a way to do that currently, but yeah, it's a great suggestion though, the note off to the side. Let's see, next question. Feature parity for Linux hosts vis-a-vis Windows, especially extensions, Let's Encrypt at the portal, top level domains and wildcards. So I'll send that out there. Yutong, I'm going to shift over to you. And I think just more generally, if you talk to just sort of the current plan that we've got in place for the managed certs.
Yeah, so for the current plan that we have for managed certs is that the next step that we're looking at is to be able to support Apex or naked domains. And then in terms of an ETA, we can't provide that one yet. But yes, we are looking to being able to have this support as like our main big milestone for the next part.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Yutong. All right, let's see. Next one, when is private endpoints, sometimes called private link for web apps, going GA? So I don't have a precise date, and the simple reason there is it's not like months and months away, but it's also admittedly not tomorrow. We are moving full steam ahead on getting it out there for public preview across Windows and Linux, and you should actually see that rolling out the door here basically imminently. And then believe me, we have no interest in sort of sitting there pontificating on a preview forever. So we will GA in essence as quickly as possible after that, based on what we see in terms of feedback, whether the quality is holding up, things like that. So I know soon is not necessarily something, if you're a CIO or you go to your CIO, you can't really say, hey, well, it's there soon, but it's definitely on the fast track for us to get it out there and officially tagged as GA. Let's see, next question. What kind of programming languages are not supported on App Service? So let's put it, the simple answer is technically there aren't any unsupported languages. Again, as usual, there's always a few caveats on the Windows variation of App Service. For all practical purposes, you are sort of limited to the set of languages that you see there in the portal when you go into like the create application experience. However, on the Linux side of the platform, even though you will see, if you're doing a source code based deployment, a set of default languages, the reality is we also do just support regular old, single Docker containers. And that is actually a very popular part of the service. So what we will do is tell folks, for example, if you wanted to try something like using Rust or Go on the Linux side of App Service, just go out and use a Docker container, build it and then go out and deploy it on the platform. And that's an intentional decision on our part, which is we try to have the very, very popular languages there available by default, but then also it's a completely valid use case to go build a Docker container and put it on the Linux app service. And as long as there's a port we can connect to, you're off to the races. Let's see, how do you communicate platform updates and how does that sort of affect the platform all up? So typically things like, the proverbial Patch Tuesday patches, those we don't go out and explicitly communicate currently because they're just pretty much in place updates that we make onto the platform. And they are in general expected to be non-impactful. Other things, however, like .NET Core will get, typically there's a GitHub issue feed where various folks involved in the .NET Core project will give preliminary updates and then sort of ongoing updates in terms of what we're doing there. Also, I did see it a little bit farther down in some of the questions, but we are getting ready to queue up .NET Framework 4.8 onto the service, and given the fact that is potentially interesting to a lot of folks. That's an example where it's so broad-based, we will do, for example, email notifications and maybe as far as portal toasts in the browser. In general, though, right, the overriding intent of the platform is that if we're doing things like security updates, that they're non-impactful, and also for things other than .NET Framework, which just it's an in-place update because that's how it works, that we don't go out and just sort of automatically force you onto a newer version. Like, if you're on .NET Core and you're on 3.1, or for that matter, let's say an older thing like 2.2, we're not going to suddenly upgrade you to 3.1 because that would be a major breaking change. So it's typically security patches or a minor version update that's meant to be a compatible update. We will frequently just do those updates in place, but anything that's highly impactful or a major update, we will go out and send much broader notifications about that. Let's see here. Any plans for enabling Azure Private DNS zones for VNet integration with App Service web apps? The short answer is yes, that is planned because we see that's a stumbling block, certainly for any of the virtual network integration scenarios, sort of similar to the private link support that we were talking about earlier. I don't have a specific date, but I do expect that support to become available here in the coming months. Let's see, best practices when deploying Azure function apps using deployment slots. So that one I'm going to defer on because, again, I apologize. We are more of the app service team, although, again, of course, Azure functions, they do run on us from a platform perspective. But I admit we're not the SMEs that will be able to sort of address this question. That's something definitely more for the Azure functions folks. Let's see, what are the plans to evolve integration with VNet and on-prem networks? And I will go publish that question. So yeah, realize overall for virtual network integration, even though there's been a lot of work going on rolling out the new regional VNet integration, both for Windows just a few months ago, and Linux is a lot closer to being able to get that to GA. That doesn't mean that we stop with that. So yeah, there are limitations around some things in terms of, are you able to go do peering, global peering, things like that. So if there are blocks like that today, those are things that we will eliminate in the future. But again, it's just to set expectations. It's not like in a month or two. Realistically, the first big goal here in the first half of the year was to get the new regional VNet integration up and running. And then I think you'll see that we'll continue to make, I would say, pretty much massive investments in it to continue to refine it here as time goes on. Speaking of which, another question on VNet support. Will the ability to connect to private link Azure SQL be available in app services soon? And so again, with the caveat that soon doesn't necessarily mean in 4 weeks, this scenario is definitely on the plate to make sure that it works with all of the private link plus regional VNet integration. So it will be coming. I'll say throwing a dart at a dartboard, let's say between now and at worst Ignite, not that we're going to wait until Ignite, that scenario should be lighting up. Let's see, another one, functions. Okay, what is the roadmap for GPU inferencing support on app services or functions? For the functions part, again, I'm going to defer because, again, admittedly, none of us here are really the right ones to be addressing that. App service specifically, we don't currently have on the roadmap to bring GPU support into the public variation of the service in large part because, right, we have to sort of build out the footprint, and currently GPU is a little bit too, let's say, exotic, just given the nature of how app service is built out. I do think it's possible, and again, like I said earlier, never say never. I think it's possible we will get to a point in some future variation of app service environments or something like that, where you will get to a point that you have a lot more flexibility in terms of choosing your compute, which would include using a GPU-enabled VM. But again, just full transparency, that's not like a 2 or 3 month thing that's going to show up. Also, I see a few more folks from the team have dropped in, so fair warning, as I get VNet questions and other such stuff, I'm going to start routing them to those who are truly the experts. Let's see here, question on health check. I know that the health check service for app service is now in preview, but it doesn't allow a configurable ping interval, cutoff threshold, etc. I am going to shift over to you, Jason, and ask if you can address that question.
Yeah, sure thing. So the question was, are we going to allow some of those configurations for GA? It's not going to be in the initial GA release, but we are looking into this. We've heard that feedback loud and clear that customers want to be able to lower that threshold and have their instances removed faster. So we're looking into that, but there are a lot of technical requirements that go into that because we don't want instances to be removed prematurely or to blow through our capacities. So won't be there for the initial GA release, but it doesn't mean that it won't come.
Okay, cool, thank you. And actually, since we just addressed that, there's another question saying, looking for suggestions on how to prevent traffic to an app instance, which is not fully warmed up, and then just sort of going into the details. And I think that's actually topical to what you were just talking about, Jason.
Yeah. So good question. Related to app service health checks, in a sense, there's application initialization, or known as just app init. So on Windows, you set this as part of your web config, and then that will allow you to specify any routes that should be pinged to warm up your application. So for a lot of customers, they use this to initialize a cache as they're swapping. And now there are actually 2 optional app settings that you can set as well. One being a path on your application that we should hit, and then a second one specifying the response codes that are acceptable. So this means when you swap into a new, when you're swapping between staging your production slots, we'll ping that path that you specify. And if we get an acceptable response code, then we'll continue the swap. But if we get a 500 error or something that you have specified is not acceptable, then the swap will not continue. So it blocks you from accidentally swapping an application that maybe isn't ready for your production slot, if there are any problems during that.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Jason. Let's see here. I'm going to go through a couple of quick questions. So one is, does app service support UDP protocol for messaging solutions? So currently, no. Common question, certainly get it a lot, right? Currently, the service is HTTP, HTTPS only. It's not uncommon that folks ask and say, hey, do you have UDP, TCP IP, things like that? Again, I know I'm sort of beating the proverbial dead horse, but never to say never. The question has come up frequently enough. I'd keep an eye on us just sort of over time, because eventually we may end up actually delivering a variation of the service that does have support for protocols other than just the usual HTTP, HTTP2. Another question I see here, how do you see the future for app service related to containers? I see it as a very good future. I'm joking about that, but in all seriousness, right, half the service, which is the Linux side of app service, is very much so intended to be able to bridge the divide of either publishing source code or bringing a Docker container to the cloud. And it's specifically meant to just make it a simpler and more approachable way of running containers. I tell this to folks a lot when they, previously, if this was in person on the expo floor at an Ignite or a Build, which is, it's not app services intent to be an Uber container orchestrator. But we do talk to a lot of customers and developers who are just like, like we were mentioning earlier, I want to run a framework that you don't officially have a pre-baked image for, or maybe a version that's newer than what we have, like Node, right, is a perfect example. And so that's why we have container support. And I think you will see the thrust of sort of how app service approaches containerization being about just simplicity, sort of primarily bring single container or straightforward container scenarios. We'll try to make it really easy to run that on us. Along those lines, I see a question here. What's the status of being able to intermix premium and standard plans together in the same resource group? I believe, well, first off, we do support running like any of the pricing tiers and having different app service plans with those all in the same resource group. That is supported. The question might be related to, for example, I know today if you deploy on Linux, you have to use a different resource group than if you're deploying on the Windows side of app service. Known issue. It turns out not to be very simple for us to fix, but it is something that we at least have on the plan to figure out how to disambiguate some of the esoteric problems in our management plan that make that challenging. Again, don't have a date on it, but we're acutely aware of it. And when we do finally unblock that, that will mean you can freely intermix at least Linux and Windows App Service in the same resource group. Let's see, are you working with the Windows team to get HPSys sorted so that HTTP2 works in app service and especially gRPC? So again, this is one of those things where it's definitely on the radar. Obviously, what we're talking about is today app services HTTP2 only, and more specifically, HTTP only, and more specifically for HTTP 2.0 sort of technical esoteric, we actually terminate that on our front ends. And then when we actually internally proxy the traffic to your web app, that's actually being proxied over just a standard HTTP connection. And that means that some of the more advanced HTTP2 scenarios don't work. And I believe that also means that effectively some of the things you might try out with gRPC won't work. So known state of the union today, again, I don't have a specific date, but I think you will see over time that we will have a much better answer for you on that. It may not necessarily involve specifically HTTP sys and IIS, but I do think as time passes, we'll have a much better level of support for that. Let's see. Oh, hey, here's one for you, Christina. My org has a site-to-site VPN with Azure. Is there a plan to add private bindings for app services without requiring an ACE? And I popped that, I published that in there, not quite sure exactly what what the scenario is.
Okay, all right. Well, you can use the VNet integration with site-to-site. I mean, you could VNet integration to your VNet and have site-to-site through there to on-prem. So that would give you access across it. The regional VNet integration enables you to make calls across any of your connectivity methods, which would include site-to-site. I've used that before. You don't need to use an ACE for this purpose, just the multi-tenant web app in a standard or premium B2 plan. I would create your app in a premium B2 plan just to make sure you land on one of the newer footprints. So.
Okay, cool. So let's see, scrolling through here, I see a question, can app service deliver good perf for web apps, which are heavily dependent on database and storage interactions? The answer is definitely yes. However, a few sort of standard caveats, which is for any kind of outbound connectivity where you're really heavily stressing the outbound connection layer, we definitely recommend that you do whatever kind of connection pooling is available for the specific technology. So databases, sort of as an obvious example, go out and use, for example, the connection pooling that's there for SQL DB, if that happens to be what you're connecting to. And the reason for that is, right, ultimately, especially if you're running on public app service, there is a certain shared outbound proxy layer that's handling all of the outbound connection traffic. And as a result, you're not going to have sort of infinite, shall we say, outbound connection capacity that you might see on a VM. Though having it said that, you know, if you have sort of poorly behaved apps, even if you stick them on a raw VM or again like a raw node like ACI, even there, frequently all that happens is you sort of defer the inevitable, and then eventually the misbehaved application even chews through the outbound port capacity of that compute option. So really, what it comes down to is just it's sort of pretty logical, pretty pragmatic. Just make sure you pool connections outbound wherever possible. Don't do silly things like having every single page request result in a write to the database or a write to storage, because at that point, right, the speed of your app is effectively gated on the speed of your stateful backend. And then a somewhat more advanced scenario is, again, if you're on the public app service, in a lot of regions, we bump the scale out limit up to 30 instances when you're running on the premium V2 tier. But if it turns out you need more than that, it's ahead of time, make sure to create additional instances of your app. The easiest thing is in a different region. There is actually a way to get an intra-region footprint with multiple app instances, but that's a bit more complicated to pull off. Having it said that, I can tell you from experience in a lot of cases where we do have folks where they sort of scaled out all the way that they possibly could and they're still having app problems. It's usually not a matter of scale out. It's what I was referring to earlier. Something's going on where they're just, you know, really overloading the capacity of the backend database, or they're just making too many outbound calls. And so those kinds of optimizations typically will get you a lot farther in terms of improving the scalability of an app versus just sort of massively throwing more hardware at the problem. So let's see here. Okay, there's one here. Are we planning to support Windows container apps in app service environment? The answer to that is eventually. The plan here is first to get Windows containers to GA, which probably some of you, if you've talked to us before, you've heard that. We are actually for real assiduously working on that, I promise. And as part of that, as we go out and get that product to GA, one of the things we will subsequently do to that is have an option to run Windows containers on ACE. So again, I don't have a precise date. It's not going to be in a month, but it is definitely on the plan. Let's see, any news on the free app service managed certs going to GA, and also what are the plans on naked domain support? So I'm going to just, I published that in the chat and I'll shift that over to you, Yutong. I know you touched on it a bit earlier.
Oh yeah, no worries. Okay. So in terms of the news for managed certificates, we don't have an ETA yet when we are going to GA. However, our plan is to be able to have the integration to support naked or Apex domains, and that is the next big milestone that we are going for. Right now, it's currently on the works already, so we can't say it's gonna come like in the next 2 months or so, but definitely it's the next thing that we are trying to aim for, and we're trying to work on it as soon as we, or try to get it finished as soon as we can.
Okay, and then cool, Yutong, since we've got you here, there's a question here, can app service container logs be routed to app insights? And I think you've been working on that with some of the Azure Monitor log integration.
So can app service container logs be routed to app insights? So right now, I don't believe it could be routed. However, this is something that we could also look to as our next steps. And then, yeah, definitely we could talk about the container stuff with our engineers for this feature.
So this is something, correct me if I'm wrong, this is about the underlying Docker logs that we have on the Linux platform. And yeah, to your point, Yutong, I know it's come up before in talks with our engineers. So it's not there currently, but again, it's something that I would expect to see in the not too distant future.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Let's see. Just and again for folks who are attending the session at this point, as you can probably imagine, we have a few hundred questions, so I apologize. We are not going to be able to answer all of them. So what I'm doing here is quickly scrolling through them and seeing what I can, what's interesting that maybe we haven't touched on before that I can have some of the folks who are here with us today address. Let's see. Execute SQL option, VNet. Ooh, Christina, here's one for you. So the question is VNet integration to app service for Linux. When will this be in production?
It'll be going to GA in a few weeks. So we're rolling out the bits as we speak, and it'll support the same type of capabilities you see on the Windows VNet integration. So you'll be able to do a route all via app setting and send all your traffic into your VNet. We'll also be adding an API, so if you want to apply policy on that later on, you'll be able to do that too. So, but in the first thrust, in a few weeks, is getting VNet integration to GA for Linux. It's already in Windows. Go ahead.
Cool. Yeah, and also, I mean, to follow up on that, again, this is one of these areas where the goal is to get to a point that basically the backend VNet integration across Windows and Linux app service is basically as close to parity as possible. I think, you know, what folks are seeing today is just it's a transitional point in time where we switched over to an entire new implementation of how we connect to virtual networks, and that's why just sequencing wise, you sort of got one part of the service before you got the other part. But again, going forward, the intent is to basically keep the capabilities at parity between the two platforms. So since we got Christina here, I'm going to pull up another question here. It says, are there any plans for smaller or larger isolated SKUs?
The answer to that is yes. There are plans in work to offer other sizes to the isolated SKUs on the existing ACE and also with the stuff we've got in work right now for the next ACE. So
cool, great. Since we're sort of ACE networking, we've got a question here. Do you have a clearer timeline for private link availability in specific European regions? This question happens to be mentioning UK West South, but yeah.
Yes. So I get this question a few times a day. I can't wait till I get this out the door. We've been doing the deployment for a little while. It'll wrap up in just a few weeks and we'll have it in public preview in all regions. I don't have a GA date because we need a little time in preview to make a determination whether or not we can go to GA directly or whether or not we'll have to do another patch to it. So right now you're looking at roughly first week of June, last week of May. It's really tied to when we can get the deployment, including the UI deployment out the door.
Cool. Yeah, I know a lot of people waiting for that. And then also to add some color to that, you know, in general, other than a very, very early deployment of a feature like this, where it might be only in a region or two, because we just need to sort of see how it's shaking down. Again, the intent for all of these is roll it out worldwide, because again, we understand we don't want customers saying, well, okay, I'm in one region today, I'm in a different region on Tuesday, and suddenly it's like, poof, well, where's the feature? So again, you're just sort of seeing the bright seams here of literally the very initial rollout of some of these features. So another, this is another great topical question here for you, Christina. Are there any plans to support NAT gateway through the regional VNet integration so we can have a fixed list of outbound IPs?
This is where it's more fun to do these things in person because I can crack jokes. So the bright side is that it works for me. I'm able to test this in Canary, works just fine. We'll be getting the feature rolled out across the board. This is actually a networking change. It's not really an app service change. So as soon as they deem it's ready to go, they'll roll an update out for the NAT gateway, and bam, you'll be able to use the NAT gateway with your multi-tenant web apps. So if you're unfamiliar with what you'll get out of it, you get the ability to have a dedicated address for just your app and nobody else's, and you escape any of the snap outbound port restrictions we have in Azure App Service. You'll have all 64,000 ports available to your apps in your app service plan.
Yeah, cool. Good stuff. That's a great question to raise that. Probably not surprising to folks. As Christina was joking, we get sort of probably ask that multiple times a day, and it'll be great when we finally get it in the service, because it'll definitely address a host of asks, both for scalability and security, about the stability of the outbound addresses. Let's see. So we've got a question here. What is the plan around making the public non-ACE, non-app service environment variation of app services zone redundant? Great question. The quick sort of 20-second run through of zone redundant, like what does that mean? If you work with other parts of app service, with other parts of Azure, some services have support for what are called availability zones. It's basically a way to get 2 or 3 instances of a thing, a compute option, spread across physically disparate zones within the same region. And so it provides an increased level of what we call intra-zone resiliency without necessarily having to worry about deploying in 2 completely separate regions of the world. So App Service has had support for being able to use availability zones for a few months, but admittedly, it does require using app service environments, and there is complexity in it, no doubt about it. With that said, underneath the hood, we are actively working on bringing availability zone support to app service. I don't expect that it's going to be a public-facing, like, consumable feature for all of us in the next few months, simply because literally the first thing we're doing, like as we speak, is rolling out the foundation of it. And that just means, like, the internal guts, as it were, of app service are getting built out in a way that we're spread across zones. So that's sort of within the scope of our service, we can support zone redundancy. So that's sort of what's going on internally for the next few months. And then once that's sort of behind us and settled down, then it is very much so the next step is to be able to bring to public app service as a as a consumable offering for all of you, a way to say, hey, deploy this app, and by the way, I want it running on a part of app service that is zone redundant. So not quite there today, but it's definitely something that's on the plan. And like I said, the foundational building blocks are already in progress. Let's see. Oh, this is an interesting one. Question for you, Andrew, though it also is sort of a little bit topical on Linux. So there's a question here about Azure Files, Windows containers on app service. And I guess just basically asking us sort of what's the option that we have there.
Yeah, so the option we have there is you can mount an Azure file share to your web apps, and it'd be read-write from all instances. The addition we made in the Windows containers was to match parity that we had with Linux containers when the feature was announced under preview. We decided not to do blob storage in that instance because only one instance can actually have a write lock, so that can provide issues when scaling. That feature itself will go GA with Windows containers when Windows containers itself goes GA. I know there's we have work today where a Linux container-based app can do a path mapping to an Azure file share, and we're also looking at it to answer the normal follow-on question. We're also looking at it for code-based deployments of applications as well. That work's underway, but I don't know personally the exact status of that right now. I just know it's in progress.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Andrew. So looking through a couple of other quick things, just noting as we said, can we get an update about deploying .NET 4.8 to app service? So just reiterating, because we touched on it a little while ago, we are actively in planning for bringing 4.8 to app service. I actually expect a lot of us will probably be seeing emails in your inboxes in the not too distant future, giving you the sort of the preliminary heads up that, hey, we are planning to roll out .NET 4.8. And because again, we're already, like I said, this will probably show up in a lot of your inboxes in the not too distant future. I think the current plan is to get 4.8 rolling out sometime around August or so. And again, the precise dates will be there in the public email blast that goes out here shortly, but it is coming. Again, it's like we had plans to do it a bit earlier, but like I'd mentioned earlier, when the whole virus problems hit here in Azure for very good reasons, we put halts on doing any kind of major changes because we didn't want to be sort of upsetting the apple cart, as it were, for folks who were already running live in production. But again, we're past that, and so we picked up again moving forward on that. Let's see. So I see here a question. Any plans to support Let's Encrypt officially? In the next few months, no, because we're hoping the Apex domain support that Yutong was mentioning a few minutes ago with App Service Managed Certificates will hopefully address the last sort of gap that we've got. With that said, in all seriousness, we're not dismissive of the ask. We actually had some very intensive internal discussions on it. At one point in the not too distant past, we were seriously thinking about potentially building it. So for the near term, the answer still is no. But again, as I've said before, for some of the other questions, never say never. We'll definitely keep an eye on it, and it's not like a firm no, heck no, we're never going to do it. It's just for now, I think we can do better with what we've got, and then we'll sort of reassess where we are in the future. Let's see. Okay, so we already saw that. And again, like I said, for folks who are on the attending, I'm just sort of quickly scrolling through everything because there's sort of more questions and then we're going to have time to go through. And so I'm just sort of picking out topical ones. Let's see. So I see there's one here. Is there an end of life of the cloud service worker roles? This one, I admit, again, we're not the best team to ask that. The one reason why I do just sort of touch on it here for a brief point is, as some of you probably know, a lot of the internal deployments of app service are actually built on cloud services underneath the hood. More a matter of just like sort of maybe interesting topical tidbit. We are in the process of ourselves on app service switching over to VM scale sets. That's also part of the reason why the earlier question about availability zone support is interesting, because that's, again, part of the reason why we as a service are moving to VMSS. So certainly, cloud services for us, at least, it's not going away tomorrow or anything, but at least, as an example of a mainline Azure service, we definitely are walking down the path of moving on to a somewhat more modern compute substrate underneath the hood. Let's see, here's an interesting one. Is it necessary to use Azure Front Door for extra security? So I'm going to shift it over to Christina and see if you can address that question. And then just more generally, sort of like, hey, Front Door, what do you put in front of app service, sort of that kind of scenario?
Sure. So is it necessary? I wouldn't say it's necessary, albeit if I was running a production website, I would always have a WAF device of some sort in front of it. The same WAF layer is used, well, it's almost exactly the same between the app gateway and Azure Front Door. So if you were multi-regional, I would use Front Door. If I was single region, I'd consider use of the app gateway. The Front Door service also provides application acceleration. So if you're looking at speeding your apps, you get beyond just security, you'll also get, acceleration because it keeps the connections warm. But honestly, I would use Front Door if at all possible, but I did have to throw out the app gateway, which is another possibility. Oh yeah, one other small caveat. If you were looking for added security because compliance required it, you could do something such as use private endpoints to have a private IP in your VNet and then have an app gateway in front of that. And that's a model that's similar to hosting inside an app service environment. Now, private endpoints, again, will be in preview in all regions in a few weeks. So,
okay, cool. Thank you.
Sure.
So I'm going to shift over to Jason because I see here there's a question on, is it a good strategy to use deployment slots to define environments like my app, UAT, QA, etc., or would it be better to have different resources for sort of each of those, QA test staging environments?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we see some customers use slots just for that reason. So they'll have a QA environment, a testing environment, and it allows you to get more for your money out of the app service plan. And then, of course, we see some customers that use CI/CD to deliver to a staging slot, and then they swap into production. So there's kind of two different use cases, because then if you have a large team, you can deploy your QA build to the QA slot, and then the QA team can evaluate it there. And that works really well if you're using the classic Git flow technique. because you'll have a branch for each of those environments, and then you can line each of those up to a staging slot. So I'm going to comment on this person's question and send them some documentation on this topic.
Okay, cool, thanks. So taking a quick look through some of the other questions here. So I see one that says, I would appreciate the ability to auto scale individual worker pools based on metrics or schedule on Azure Stack Hub on-prem. So Andrew, offhand, do you have context on that?
I get it is looking for autoscale there. The metrics that so on Azure Stack Hub, we don't have all of the capabilities that we have in the public service because the fabric that we actually build up on top, whilst it is cloud consistent, it doesn't necessarily have the same capabilities that we have in Azure because Azure is moving, at light speed, and so you're constantly catching up on Azure Stack Hub. In future, we will look to possibly enable the Azure Monitor integration that we have in preview in the public cloud service, and then that would expose more metrics. We are talking to the Azure Stack Hub team about enabling scenarios like autoscale, which we still can't do because we don't have some of the underlying capabilities actually directly on the Azure Stack Hub device. That would therefore give us parity in terms of the feature set that we have in public cloud, being able to auto scale based on CPU, based on memory, based on that sort of instances. As for being able to output metrics to say App Insights and then respond to them directly on an Azure Stack Hub like we can in public cloud, technically, it should be possible, but if you're a disconnected Azure Stack Hub customer, then that's not going to be possible because Application Insights is not available in a disconnected Azure Stack Hub. So some of it will be possible. It's not possible today. The scaling today is manual, based on a schedule or based on physically, writing a script, making a request to do the scale out. But it is in the realms. It is on our backlog, and it's something that we're looking at, and it is a gap for us as an app service product that we really, really do want to close. But we are reliant on the foundations that we build on.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Andrew. Scrolling through, taking a look at, there are a couple of questions here around App Insights and monitoring. So I'll take the first one. It says, will App Insights be supported for Linux app service plans? The answer is it should be, in the sense that as long as there's an App Insights SDK that's available for any of the frameworks that are running on Linux, you can always make use of that. And then I also know that the specific person on my team who deals with it is out, but we are working on being able to bring the integrated portal App Insights experience over to Linux. And that means, for example, I know there's been work going on for .NET Core, and there's been work going on for Node on the Linux variation of App Service, so that you could potentially just enable App Insights without necessarily even you as a developer having to go out and like pull down the right SDK and go put it there into your code. So the high level answer is yes. I apologize, I don't know the specific state of the union on those two efforts, but it's definitely planned. And then I'm going to shift over here for another monitoring related question over to you, Yutong. They're asking, are there plans to add diagnostic settings or app service app logs for Windows? Oh, and we got to get you off mute there.
Thank you.
There we go.
Okay, so for the app service app logs when it comes to Windows, yes, the support is coming for that. I'm estimating probably like the next 2-3 months when it comes to deployments probably. So this is definitely already will be coming for sure. And then let's see, what was the second work? We'll be having it in the next 2-3 months-ish.
Okay, cool, thanks. So I know when I was looking through here the questions, there was one of the questions was are there sort of recommendations for how would you pick a plan for app service for like an educational scenario, something to that effect. And in terms of costs and things like that, definitely what I'd say is I'd take a look at, for example, the Linux side of app service, because it does have lower price entry points. Another thing to keep in mind is if you've got, for example, newer customers that are trying things out, you can also always get a free trial. It's pretty straightforward, and we are one of the services that works very well with those. And so that just right off the bat, you don't have to pay us anything. Another thing is for both Windows and Linux, there is a free tier where, again, if you're just running a web app on us, you don't have to pay us a dime. And those are what are called perpetual free offers. So that's the thing. Definitely, if you're in any kind of environment, educational or otherwise, where you're just trying something out, certainly start out with a free tier, because that's not going to charge you a dime. And then again, the intent of the basic tier, for example, on Linux, it's meant to be definitely a lower price tier, so that you can sort of just get up and running on us without having to worry about sort of higher end premium V2 app service environments or anything like that. Let's see again, because I see we're at 2:40 in the afternoon here Pacific time, so we've got about 5 minutes or so left. Bear with me. What I'm going to do, because I know I've been sort of working from the top, I'm just going to sort of scroll down a bit, see what else I've got. Let's see here. One for you, Christina. Will multiple app services per subnet eventually be supported? I think I know what they're asking for.
Yeah, that would be the VNet integration. Whoop, there it is. So yeah, it will eventually be supported, but I don't have a timeline for it. Turns out it's kind of hard to get multiple service plans to use the same integration subnet. What we will have in this summer is the ability to have apps from one subscription use the VNet of another subscription. So you'll be able to go cross-sub, which we don't have that in place yet.
Okay, and then here's another question. Any plans to reduce the cost of an app service environment? Hard question, but I know you're working on something that will address that.
The answer to that is currently yes. I can't promise it. It's not approved, not stamped in gold, but right now we're working on it, and it's definitely a priority to try to make it less expensive. There's been at least 2 customers who've noted that it's a little pricey. Minimum of 2. So.
Yeah, and also, I mean, to add to that, as you probably write as customers, as you see what we've been adding to the public service, where you get the new VNet integration, we're bringing private link. Again, it'll take a little bit to get it to GA. The earlier question about the outbound connectivity through the managed NAT gateway, right? Part of the intent here is as much as possible to get a lot of the scenarios that previously you could have only done on an app service environment, instead giving you the ability to pull that off on the public version of app service. And that is a very intentional decision on our part, and very much so something that we have wanted to unlock for quite a while.
Yeah, you'll have a better on-ramp from where you are today, which is so stark and different. So between private endpoint, VNet integration, for that matter, we've got hybrid connections coming to Linux, just like we have in Windows. So you'll have a lot of options available. But yeah, ACE will still be your single tenant place. So.
Yep. And then I'm going to jump over here to you, Jason, because I see a good question about the health check feature. It says, why doesn't the health check allow an HTTPS ping? So that might be a bit of a brain teaser in terms of how the current worker health check works.
Yeah, so right now the worker health check is sent from an internal piece of the system. So it's not coming through the typical route that most of your user requests are coming from. We've heard this request once before, so we are looking to see how we can address this and allow that. But the short story is, since the request is coming from the internal component, it's not going through HTTPS. It's just a regular HTTP ping coming from another internal component. Okay,
good. So I'm going to, again, since we're running down here on time, pop through just a few last questions. Again, I do thank everyone who asked the questions, but to give you an idea, I think we managed to answer about 50, and I think there's like 150 plus that were asked. So I'll just pick out a few more here towards the end. I see one, when will it be possible to scale to more than 20 instances? What I'd say is two things. You can already scale out to 30 instances in a number of regions. If you keep track of the Azure service announcements, it's actually out there. It's used by all of Azure to be able to sort of publish little bits and pieces of information about various services. Definitely keep an eye on that, because we did announce when we supported 30 instances in a number of regions, and as we continue to expand that, right now that will that's sort of the avenue we'll use to go out and announce that. Let's see. I'm going to see if I can actually scroll all the way to the very, very, very end. And I apologize because this is the first time we're all using this interface. Let's see. So I see one, will app services be able to connect to file storage like you can with containers for Windows apps? So I know we have bring your own storage for Linux. I know we have it for Windows containers. Andrew, offhand, do you know, were we planning on also enabling that just for regular old app service?
Yeah, there is some investigative work going on at the moment to see what's needed to do that, and the work that is involved. I don't have any ETAs on when that might light up in terms of any form of preview there, but it is a common ask that we've had from a number of customers when we added it for containers, and it's something that we're looking at with the engineers, but I don't have the latest details on the progress on that right now.
Okay, cool, thanks. So I see another one here. It's probably a little bit more in the Azure Functions universe, but it says, any plans to phase out web jobs in favor of Azure Functions? So currently, there are no plans to do an either or. I think certainly speaking at it from the app service perspective, you've probably seen, right, Azure Functions is where all the investment goes in terms of trying to get those serverless scenarios. With that said, there is certainly a lot of web jobs usage, just because if you have like a plain old console exe app, it's a pretty straightforward way to say, hey, here's some random executable, go run it. So for the foreseeable future, I don't, and realistically, even for compat reasons, I don't think you're ever going to see us say, hey, web jobs are no longer supported. With that said, I also know there are active discussions amongst Azure Functions team members on taking a look at the scenarios that sort of force people to still use web jobs and say, hey, can we actually more formally support them? But again, that's pretty much still sort of discussions at this point. And to be clear, web jobs, like, it's not deprecated, it's still very much so there. It's just the general idea is architecturally, we'd encourage folks to say, hey, if you can implement your scenario using Azure Functions, definitely that would be the sort of preference. So again, checking time here, I'm going to scroll through, take one last question, just because it based on where my mouse pointer landed on it, and then what we'll do is we'll go through the closing slides and notes. So I see here, feature requests provide HTTPS all the way through to the application container, and I'm sort of picking that one because for anyone who's used either Windows or Linux app service, and sort of to what Jason had mentioned earlier, since time immemorial, we do terminate SSL on our front ends, and then it's sort of non-SSL clear text from our proxy layer into your workers. We do include information on, for example, a client certificate that's included in the payload, but it's not specifically SSL from the front end to the worker. With that said, there is work that has been going on for some other parts of Azure to support full 100% sort of end-to-end SSL. So that's something that, again, I don't have like a specific date, but like I said before, I wouldn't be a bit surprised seeing that we get to a point where we make that more broadly available for all of you as customers.
Stefan, I can speak briefly to that.
Sure.
We actually have it available in an app service environment. You can set a flag to encrypt traffic all the way through past the front ends to your workers. So it still terminates at the front ends, but then we re-encrypt the pipe between the front ends and the workers. So the data is encrypted all the way through to the app.
Okay, and we've got that out there in the ACE docs, just explaining how
Yes.
to do that. Okay.
There's a using an ACE document. I'll pop the link into the conversation thread.
Okay, cool, great, thank you.
Sure.
So, okay, sort of closing things up here, because again, we're a little bit over time at this point. Again, thank you for everyone who has come by. Again, I apologize. There are certainly a bazillion questions and only sort of a finite amount of time and a few of us to talk through. But again, definitely thanks for taking your time today just to send us questions and hear our answers. I've also got up here a URL just for folks to know. That's a small blog area that we have for app service specifically, and we do pop articles out there a couple of times a month. So if you're looking for more of a tactical view in terms of just like, hey, you know, what's the team doing? Is there something new coming? Is there something in preview that you'd like to know about that? If you just check there from time to time, it's a great place to go ahead and see what's going on. And then beyond that, definitely, because again, this is the first time all of us are doing this ourselves, as well as Microsoft all up. Give us feedback in the evals, let us know, because believe me, all of our experiences, we're going to try to learn from it and see what we can do better, because right, Ignite, not too far away in a few months. It's going to be all digital as well. And so what we learn here definitely feeds into that. And then the organizers have provided us their handy link so you can jump back out of this session and just get back to the overall build event. So with that, I'll just keep the slide up here for like a minute or two. We'll all go on mute. And again, thank you everyone for taking the time to pop on in and submit your questions.